Do you see my video? I don't see yours.
I can.
Okay. 5 seconds. All right, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to part 2 of the Black economy. Renee, are you with us?
I'm here. Hi.
All right, good to see you. Here we are.
Thank you
We're
so much
delighted
for
to
having
have
me.
you. Yes, we're delighted to have you join us today. This is the Black economy, part 2, gaining financial health in Black communities beyond COVID-19, the role of Black small businesses. I'm Jocelyn Sturdivant. I'm the Senior Vice President for Institutional Advancement for the National Black Child Development Institute, also known as NBCDI. I'll be your moderator for the webinar. NBCDI is a nonprofit organization. We were established 50 years ago in 1970. Our mission is to improve the lives of Black children through education and advocacy. We're going to start off with a few housekeeping items. If you have a question for our speaker, Renee Johnson, please enter it in the Q&A section of your screen, not in the chat box. All audience members will be muted throughout the session, but we'll read as many written questions as we have time for. Our distinguished guest today is Renee Johnson. She's the Senior Government Affairs Manager for the Main Street Alliance. The Main Street Alliance is the voice for small business values in the United States. The organization seeks to level the playing field so small businesses can be creators of good jobs in our communities. Let me share a few highlights from Renee's dynamic biography. Renee has worked for several small business 501c3 advocacy organizations in DC. She's now the Senior Government Affairs Manager for the Main Street Alliance. In this role, she manages federal policy and government affairs efforts for small business owners. She was appointed by Mayor Muriel Bowser to be in the Financial Services Regulatory Sandbox. And she has received many awards and recognitions, including the Rising Star Award from Campaigns and Elections magazine. She's also been profiled in Forbes and Essence magazines for her achievements. Welcome, Renee. We are so glad to have you with us. So I will start off by setting the stage for our discussion. Yes, I'm so glad we're finally getting to do this. Let me start by setting a little bit of background for our discussion. So Black small businesses have been part of our Black community in one form or another for many, many years. Many of us can recall hearing about the extraordinary examples of Black Wall Street in Tulsa. Many of us grew up with the corner store. And of course, Madam C.J. Walker is legendary in our history. And in fact, in past years, Black women have been leading the way as the fastest growing group of small businesses in the United States. Nonetheless, here we are in the COVID-19 environment, and I'd like to read quickly what one reporter had to say about COVID-19's effect on Black small businesses. Before COVID-19 took DC, this was a local writer in Washington, DC, many Black-owned businesses, some that have been social and cultural pillars in their communities for decades, already had their backs up against the wall. Soaring rents and property taxes, lack of access to financial cushions, and gentrification forced owners of some of these beloved institutions to shutter their doors. And now, with government-mandated closures of businesses, prolonged stay at home, and physical distancing orders, many Black businesses face economic devastation and are at risk of vanishing from the city. So today with Renee as our guest, we'll have a conversation. We'll take a closer look at those issues. We'll try to understand more about the relationship between Black small businesses and building the financial health of Black communities. We'll learn more about the impact of COVID-19 on Black small businesses, and we'll get a sense of what some remedies are that are underway and what we can do as individuals to be part of the solution. Renee, let me start by asking you a few questions just to clarify some terminology. First of all, what do we mean when we say Black small businesses?
Well, one, thank you guys so much for having me. This discussion is very important, very relevant. And unfortunately, COVID-19 is definitely highlighting the racial inequities that many of us face already, that needed to be already addressed and now are putting on the forefront for people to address them properly. What do we mean by Black small businesses? Well, we know that slavery ended about 1865, and emancipation provided the civil rights, permitted businessmen to operate inside the American legal structure. And with that being said, we created businesses because we were not able to be part of quote unquote society's business. So slaves that were then freed were able to open their own sort of businesses to help the economy of Blacks. We didn't have anything, when we were released from slavery and emancipated. So we had to create our own. And with that, we were innovative. We're entrepreneurs by nature and created our own businesses. And that's essentially where, the Black small business sort of started. And we just continue thriving within that same system of providing services that are owned by Blacks to create and fill needs for our communities.
Thank you, Renee. And part of what your organization seeks to do is create good jobs in communities. So when it comes to Black communities, what does that mean? How do good jobs affect the financial health of Black communities?
Yeah, well, good jobs. I don't know if anyone else's grandmother, told them when they were growing up, or mother told them, you gotta grow up and go to college so you can get a good job. And you're like, okay, I'll get a good job. But we never really actually talk about what that means in our community. But essentially it means to get an office job, something with benefits, something where you can get a bonus or some type of retirement at the end. And essentially we always look to other people to get those jobs. It wasn't something that we were self-creating in our communities. Good jobs now, I think our grandparents would be very surprised to see that we are creating those good jobs. We are those businesses that are thriving and providing those sort of benefits, resources, so that people go to work and they're able to have a life outside of work. They're able to save money and start their own businesses, and just kind of continuing the ecosystem of small business owner to small business owner, thriving in a great economy. Now, financial health. That's another thing I think personally in my, growing up, we didn't discuss finances. My parents had quote unquote good jobs, but we didn't know what that exactly meant in our financial situation. We knew that bills were paid, but we didn't know how. We didn't understand how money moved in our family. And it wasn't a thing that we talked about. It was taboo. You didn't know how much money your parents made a year. Like if you really think about it, I couldn't tell you if my mom made $60,000 or $120,000. I have no clue. So that framework of just understanding financial health starts at a young age, and how your families operate financially. We like to believe we're at good financial health, meaning that your bills are paid, you're able to get credit, you're able to obtain things that you desire, with monetary means. But that's not necessarily saying you have good financial health. Good financial health is understanding what your money does, how you move your money, how you're able to handle money, and how you're able to create a system for you to always have or not have money.
Thank you, Renee. That's really helpful. And for those of you who were with us for part one of this webinar, we talked specifically about work, wages, and wealth And so that discussion combined with what you just said really helps us understand how Black small businesses can be instrumental to helping people develop those essential components of financial health. That's work, wages, and wealth. It's good jobs. It's all the things that we're talking about. Let's fast forward a little bit and talk about this COVID-19 environment that we're in. Let's take sort of a backward look, a present look, and a quick forward look. How were Black small businesses doing before COVID-19? How are they doing now? And where are they headed if we don't take action?
Yeah, that's a loaded question because we want to say good, but the story tells us differently, right? And on the onset of this conversation, I mentioned how racial inequities are coming out and showing more prevalent, and that goes to the before COVID. Small business owners of color, specifically Black small business owners, we're doing okay, right? We were seeing a surge, especially within Black women small business owners, especially in cities like Atlanta, Oakland, Detroit, that were thriving, that were growing, that were becoming sort of like the it thing that people wanted to shop with. The unfortunate thing about it was still access to capital to many, many, many of these Black business owners and women. Going to a regular bank was not something many could do. You couldn't go to a bank and get a regular loan because you didn't meet the standards of credit history, having surplus of $250,000, or going into opening your business in a location that was desirable by the bank. So we had to finance these things alone. And you see in communities across the country of Black communities, especially, that we use our network, our friends, GoFundMes, things of that nature as alternatives. Or even one of my friends likes to put it, the hustle of your job to hustle for your own business. People get jobs and second jobs so that they can live out their dreams of owning their own business. And so that's what we were seeing before COVID. During COVID, we know that, Congress did the CARES Act, and it was supposed to be this magnificent program that helped the economy and small business owners alike, regardless of race or, religious belief. And contrary to popular demand, while they were writing the bill and thinking through what part of the SBA, the Small Business Administration, that can kind of handle this sort of funneling the system of a program to, the 7A loan program was designed for them to use. If anyone is familiar with the SBA and the 7A loan program, you know that it is already the worst program for minorities. And the reason I say that is because it's for preferred lenders. And if we already know that there are historical issues in banking communities, again, discrimination against Blacks, why would we think that this will be a fair system that operates to assist people during a pandemic? Well, we set ourselves up for failure. Well, I won't say we, but Congress set us up for failure, because we see right now the 7A loan program gave money to who? Ruth Chris, Shake Shack, all kind of private equity companies, and how many small business owners, particularly of Black descent, received them? Not many. And it went to a point where I think I saw some data where it said like 94% of Black women small business owners did not get any kind of loans from that program. So during COVID, we're seeing that we weren't taken serious as small business owners, that a system was created to provide relief, but it did not provide relief to us. It was actually leaving us behind. It wasn't until people were saying, hey, this isn't fair. I have a bank account with Wells Fargo, but they're telling me that I can't get a loan or apply because I haven't had a bank account long enough with them, or I don't have a line of credit with them. So then each bank started doing more and more to prevent access to these loans that were technically for everyone, and especially small business owners. We are now seeing small business owners, especially those that are Black, who are making the decision between bankruptcy, food and eating, or actually like just giving up and not even doing anything. Like they just have to like sell their house because some leverage their homes. But one thing I would be remiss to do if I forgot to mention, we are just talking about the banked Black community right there. We're not talking about the bankless and low income communities. So they didn't even have an opportunity to get any of the loans, because if you don't have a bank, you were able to apply, because the banks created rules that stated that you needed to be part of our system, whatever, or have an account in order to apply for a loan. So we're already seeing that this is not going to pan out well in the end. What I'm thinking post-COVID, if we don't take action and talk to Congress, and meaning like advocate, organizations, small business owners alike, we won't have anything. I think that we will see sort of like the Black Wall Street close. We will see that again. We will see thousands, if not millions, of small business owners and entrepreneurs and startups never seeing the light of day again. And it's now that we have to start doing that action to make sure that that doesn't happen.
Renee, thank you for that. I wanted to circle back to a question that I had intentionally meant to ask earlier, but intentionally saved it for a little bit later in our discussion. We'll bring that up now. I want to talk about childcare, and that's an issue of interest to many of our audience, many folks in our audience. Our organization focuses a great deal on early learning, early care and education, and childcare is of significance, as many parents are discovering, not only as a support for families that allows them to work, or for small businesses that allows employees to work, but many folks own childcare businesses. Childcare in and of itself is a business, is an industry. Can you talk a little bit about the childcare issue in the context of Black small businesses and COVID-19's impact?
Yeah, so childcare, Black small business, and the impact, right? And there's a huge intersectionality between the two. We know that a lot of employees, especially in low-income communities, are essential employees. Just by, unfortunately or fortunately, the jobs that we elect to pursue. So you're seeing a lot of in the home health care and daycare centers and grocery stores. In these professions, we know our community is more prevalent. The thing about that means we have these stay-at-home orders where students and children aren't able to go to childcare. They're not able to go to school. They're not able to go anywhere, but yet there's essential employees who still have to go to work. Well, what do you do with the children? Because you're still essential and you still need to go to work. Because we also know that the treatment and HR policies in those types of jobs are just horrendous. People fear losing their job, getting a demerit, getting dock pay, getting not scheduled hours, because then they don't have any money. And there's not really an opportunity right now to go find another job. So people are doing the best that they can. Now, how does that relate to childcare? Well, these workers don't have anywhere to put their children during the day. Their kids can't go to school. Their kids aren't at childcare. What do we do? And this is part of the system that, unfortunately, many members of Congress are not focused on. Why are we not focusing on having these essential employees getting some sort of tax credit, some sort of rebate, some sort of financial stimulus money, in addition to, right, what they already have done, to ensure that we're able to provide services for babysitters that are actually qualified and will make sure that our children are taken care of. And then also deeming some sort of childcare abilities to be essential, because these employees, again, have to go to work as well. So there's this intersection where I think Congress needs to come back and have a real discussion on how employees and even some employers, especially sole proprietors, how they need to ensure that they are able to have the ability to have childcare during this time as well.
Thank you, Renee. I was just having a discussion with a friend earlier today. She's the executive director of a center, and she was talking about just the excruciating difficulty that she and many of the parents who send children to her centers are facing right now. Really the agony of feeling like you have to choose between the health and safety of your child and the ability to make a living. And it's being felt not only by parents but also by childcare center owners and directors. I'd like to talk about some of the initiatives that are underway to address these issues. But before we do so,
Hi, Jocelyn.
Yes.
Hi, we're having a little bit of trouble with your audio right now. Would it be possible to re-log in really quickly?
Sure.
If you could just pose your question to Renee before relogging. Thank you.
Okay, Renee, the question would be, just tell us a little bit about your background, what brought you to this work, what has been the significance of Black small businesses in your personal and professional life?
Of course. So my background is I am actually a lobbyist here in Washington, D.C. for Main Street Alliance, which is a 501c3 small business advocacy organization where we provide advocacy training as well as connecting small business owners to their state and local legislative and elected officials, as well as to congressional offices to advocate for small business issues. So anything that impacts small business owners, we are here to help connect and ensure that voices are heard. And more specifically, the racial equity piece that we have to this is ensuring that we are amplifying and providing the microphone for small business owners of color. My background outside of this too is that I grew up coming from a family that owned businesses. We owned a church, we owned a whole bunch of stores in our local community. And it was always that made me feel that I was able to connect with other people because of the services and the relationships you build within the community when you own a business. Additionally, there's so much that happens within the Black community that we do not realize that the impact of small business owners have throughout our life entirety. As a kid, many of us grew up in communities where there was a corner store, and we knew the corner store owner and their family because it was someone that lived in the community. They went to your church. They knew who you were. And what they have done and the sort of entrepreneurship that they provided was a kid will come into their store and buy a whole bunch of candy and then take it to school. What I want to do is magnify these sort of relationships as how that kid learned that I can go to a supply chain such as the corner store and then go to school and be my own business owner and have a little markup price that I'm making profits for myself. And I'm actually then giving and providing a service to those who want it, such as candy. So the entrepreneurship spirit within the Black community is alive and well and thriving. And this is sort of what I love to do and speak to in ensuring that one, Congress understands the need of Black small business owners, as well as highlighting legislation that definitely ensures that Black small business owners are not left behind. Many things are owed to our community, and I want to make sure that we're able to successfully have them and ensure that the playing field that we have isn't sort of shortened and it's actually elongated, because we know that that playing field, we're starting in yard 15 while others are starting yard 40, ahead of us. So that's just a little of me and what I do.
Thank you so much. I'm going to test the audio again. How is this? Are you able to hear me?
Yes, definitely better.
Okay, wonderful. So we are facing great challenges, but I had a conversation with someone about this earlier. We are nonetheless in a historical moment, and it's not the first time, right? Black community has faced many formidable challenges at different junctures in history. We both work for strength-based organizations. We both are from backgrounds and in communities that have tremendous assets and resources. So let's focus a little bit on what to do about the situation we're in. When it comes to Black small businesses, helping Black communities regain or gain financial health in the COVID-19 environment. If our nation, for once, were to take all of the steps that should be taken to address this, what would that look like? What would some of those strategies be? And what would it take to actually implement them?
Well, one thing and this is me being me, and the parents that I have, reparations would definitely help because we're the only group of people that have been forced into situations that were not good, i.e. slavery, right? And have not received any funding for our unfortunate usage of others, right? We're the only group. And I think it's time that we really have a real serious conversation in our country about the wrong that was done to our people and make it right. And I think that would be a first step. I think additionally, going into that conversation, we have to talk about access to capital, right? Redlining started because we were excluded from not only living in certain communities, but from banking. That's why we have Black banks like One United Bank, Industrial Bank, because we were put out of a system that systematically created our lives and livelihoods for whatever we wanted access to. If we're able to address that issue of how people, especially Black people, are treated when they are going to banks and for financial assistance, and are able to have real conversations about what has happened in discriminatory practices, that would be another step. Predatory loans, because those are geared to specific communities. We see those cash, neon green signs in stores, and, get your cash your check here, title loans here. That's not helping any of us. It never was designed to help us. It was actually designed to keep us further back, because the APR rate on those loans are insane. And you have to keep up with the payments just so that you can keep the little money that they gave you access to. So it's a cycle for us to continuously put money that we're making and struggle to pay things that we already have. So we have to talk about the predatory cycle. And then also we have to talk about realistic equal pay. Regardless where you are working, there's probably some sort of structure of pay. And not necessarily it is based on merit or anything that actually has to do with a job, but actually based on a lot of what people look like. And if we want to have more entrepreneurs, we have to have an ecosystem that supports people who are working. And more specifically, we need to engage other communities in making sure that we're paying people properly for the work that they render. Those are just a couple of steps to start with. Trust me, there's a lot more I could come up with.
Sure. Can you talk a little bit more about some of the legislative work that you're doing right now? As many folks know, there's a lot of work going on right now on Capitol Hill to address the situation that we're in. I know that you have spent many long days, if not nights, pouring through legislation. So tell us, what's that all about? And we've seen this before. We saw the Great Recession. We've seen the Great Depression. We've heard at least about the Great Depression.
Yeah.
What's coming out of these efforts? And again, what can be done to assure that these efforts will satisfy, centuries old needs that we have experienced in our communities?
Yeah. And, it's amazing to read some of this legislation. And if you've never read legislation before, I just beg you to try one time. Not maybe 1,800 pages of it, but, definitely read it, because the devil is in the details. And that's where we figure out where a lot of the problems lie within sort of how things roll out. But to ask the former question that you had, The CARES Act, which was what Congress passed in March, which many people know that that's where the stimulus money came from. So like the $2,000, you know, that people were receiving, you know, their Trump check. That stemmed from the CARES Act. And within that act, there actually was this thing called the Paycheck Protection Program. And essentially that program is what we discussed a little earlier, where it was the 7A, the preferred lenders, like the Wells Fargo's, Bank of America, Chase, that usually historically discriminate against Black and brown people, was provided an opportunity for small business owners to apply for a loan that then turns to a grant if in fact you followed stipulations. Well, the stipulations were not actually provided to a lot of people on the onset when the program rolled out. There were tons of problems with the program, as we discussed as well. Like Ruth Chris got a loan, and yet many small business owners of color did not, because banks were rolling out red carpets to provide them loan applications, whereas they were discriminating against people because of, you know, they did not have an account or XYZ fake rule that they made. That made the news because people were like, this is ridiculous. I'm going to lose it all. I'm going to lose my house. I'm going to lose my car. I'm going to lose my life's work. And they were advocating. And within their advocating to Congress, the HERO Act came out 2 days ago, or was it yesterday? It's been a week, guys. And the HERO Act is supposed to fix some of these issues that we were seeing. Essentially, one of the big things that it's supposed to do is create a data reporting on who's applying and receiving loans and how much. Technically, racial and sexual orientation information are things that we don't want actually to ask as a direct question, because there's legal ramifications when you start going down that route. But they added zip codes because you can decipher where people are from based upon their zip codes. And that was then added, but it did ask about gender, what you identify as. Additionally, it provided additional weeks that people will be able to use the program. So instead of 8 weeks that you would get for your loan amount to pay your employees, you would get up to 24 weeks, which extends through December of this year. This bill sounds good, but it's got a lot of bad things in it. So my organization is partnering with several other small business advocacy groups, some of the church groups, civil rights groups, and you name it. And we're trying to advocate to ensure that there's some racial equity pieces outside of this data reporting. And with that said, there's this thing called the Saving Our Street Act, which is by Senator Harris and by Ayanna Pressley on the House side. And this bill is designed to be a grant for small business owners through the Department of Treasury. And the reason they want to use the Department of Treasury is because we're seeing the backlash of the SBA. The SBA has definitely not been a friend of the Black community, and they're showing it even more. So they're trying to figure out programs outside the SBA to provide this assistance. And what it will do is provide $250,000 in a grant to low-income small business owners and true small business owners. So if you have 10 employees or fewer, or if you have 25 in a low-income community, you will be eligible for this grant. There's no application process where you have to be, you know, with a bank. And there's also talk about having a debit card where those small business owners who are in situations where they need this grant, but do not have a banking relationship, would then be provided assistance that way. And this is to basically help all the small business owners that were left out of the first package. Congress is supposed to vote, more specifically the House of Representatives, tomorrow. And we're advocating very hard for them to make some changes today and tomorrow morning. From there, it moves to the Senate, and we will see what they will do and what other grant programs for people of color, specifically Black and brown communities, that they're willing to put into this legislation. We know that we have to ensure that our voices are heard because, again, we were not thought about in the CARES Act, but now here in the HERO Act, there's more of a focus onto our communities. And for me, the issue is we should have been a part of the CARES Act, and it shouldn't have been, we need to advocate for ourselves after the fact when we know good well that this was not designed for us. Many small business owners of color, again, have closed, have lost a lot of things, and more particularly those in the Black and brown community. And we need to make sure that we're continuing to lift these issues, because if we don't, we will then be forgot about as well.
Thank you, Renee. You are touching on an issue that I really wanted to make sure we spent plenty of time on. This came up in part one with so many remedies, so much legislation, regulations, so many businesses or individuals who already have advantages seem to reap the most benefits from these kinds of initiatives. And it is reassuring to hear that there is some effort underway to address the smallest of small businesses, the least resourced small businesses in our community. I wanted to read a couple of statistics. A large percentage of Black small businesses are sole proprietorships, meaning they don't have employees beyond the person who has created the business. But even so, according to a 2016 report by the Association for Enterprise Opportunity, overall, and again, this was all in the pre-COVID-19 environment, according to the report, Black business owners are wealthier than their peers who do not own businesses, and business ownership creates new wealth faster compared to wage employment. At the same time, small businesses tend to hire from the community, creating jobs for neighborhood residents. And here's the core thing I wanted to share. According to the study, opportunities for Black entrepreneurs to succeed are critical for economic empowerment in Black communities, where currently there's virtually zero liquid wealth coupled with higher than average rates of employment. So again, it is good to hear that, at least in this round, there will be more attention paid to very, very small businesses. It is easy, perhaps, for folks who have lots of resources to undervalue these entities. But as we know from research and from our own experience in communities, even the smallest of businesses can really have a vital impact in our community. Let's talk a little bit now about what the rest of us can do. So not just the folks who are reading 1,800 pages of legislation and regulations, but organizations like NBCDI that are focused on the well-being of Black children and families, individuals who care about these issues. What are some of the things that we can all be doing to make sure that Black small businesses survive, perhaps even thrive after COVID-19, and continue being the contributors to the health of our communities that we know they can be?
Yeah, one thing everyone in the world can do to help a Black small business owner is buy something at cost, like at the cost that they have to sell it, not a discount, buying what they need right now. We need to definitely continue to support them because they may not have the Uber Eats or accessibility to Postmates or what have you, but if there's a local restaurant that's Black owned in your community and they have a pickup, go pick it up, because now more than ever, they need this money because more than likely they didn't get a loan. So that's definitely one thing we can all do together. Now, as advocates, what we can do is definitely lobby Congress. And I say lobby because this is an advocacy issue. We need to make sure that legislation is done. We need to make sure that they understand that there is not just a cry, but a demand for these services and relief for our community. That if we do not have this, it is dire to our communities. It is dire to the economy of the Black community. People will not have a lot. People are losing their jobs, and more specifically, people of color. And if we're not out here telling Congress what we need, they will make up and say what we need. They will tell us what we need and tell us why they can't give us what we actually want. One thing I will say about that is because there's like a lot with the CDFIs, community development financial institutions. I think they're great. However, they're not accessible to everyone. Everyone doesn't have a CDFI in their local community. So funding only CDFIs for racial equity is not going to work. We need to make sure Congress does things that really impact the community. And it's not just a one-size-fits-all situation, just like with the farming community, if you will, or agriculture. We need to make sure that they know that we're part of that community too, and still are not provided resources because we have an added layer of color. So we want to make sure that we have not allies, but accomplices when we're lobbying members of Congress. Also to write letters to Pelosi and to Schumer and to McConnell to let them know about your story of a small business owner, of what you're experiencing right now. If you had additional money that was a grant and not a loan, how that would help you. And finally, what I would say for everyone as well in the advocacy space is to incorporate small business into the conversation. In every sector of advocacy, there's a small business owner that does it. So we want to make sure that their voices are heard, especially now. So reach out to a small business owner of color and talk with them and ensure that they're able to not only uplift your message, but also provide the small business perspective so that holistically we can talk about these issues that really impact our community at a larger scale and not just from one sort of lens that we usually look at.
Well, Renee, you have led us right into the next segment that I'd like to get into. I would like to remind the audience that if you have a question for Renee, please enter that question in the Q&A section of your screen. Please do not put it in the chat section, put it in the Q&A section. Particularly if you're out there, you're a small business owner in the audience, or you know someone who's a small business owner, you have one in your community that you're concerned about. This is a great time to enter your question and we can have some discussion around it. A couple questions have come in already, and Renee, if it's okay with you, I'd like to shift to addressing a couple of those. Is that okay?
That's great with me.
Okay, great. So the first question we have is, do you think cash and payday loans prey on our communities? I grew up in Southeast Washington, D.C., and my mother used to file her taxes in the back of a liquor store. How do we inform Black people, especially in low-income areas, on ways to avoid these places, or even to understand taxes and how to file for free? So a few things in that question, right? So payday loans, which you mentioned earlier, where to file your taxes in environments that are not predatory.
Yep.
The great elements that are often in our communities, but also sometimes the elements that are not as helpful.
Yeah.
So what do you?
Well, and I'll just say, you know, my dad, I'm from Chicago. And so my dad used to file his taxes at a liquor store as well. But the thing was, this liquor store was a Black owned liquor store. And it was like someone my dad grew up with, right? Who had an accountant that came there and provided the services. So that's what the problem is sometimes. It's not necessarily the community not realizing that like there's not someone there to help them, but the person is not necessarily there to help the community. So you need to just be careful and mindful of that because, hey, you know, there's angels in all places and that liquor store may be a good place. He could have been a real accountant that could have helped. But yeah, we just have to be mindful of who and why people are doing what they're doing and where they're doing it and why. But to go back to the payday loan, DC especially, and I live here actually in Southeast DC myself, DC especially has banned predatory loans for consumers. So you don't longer see like the ACE check cashing places anymore in Washington, DC. They're banned. And the reason is because they were so predatory and they were only in specific communities where they did not assist people in making their lives thrive. They put them in a cycle of owing money to them. And it was residents in the district that actually advocated for that and won that battle. And I stress anyone, if there's consumer check cashing like ACE, places like that, to do so, because it's not helping our community. And to be honest, you can cash a check at a grocery store as well, or wherever the check is drawn upon on that bank, with no sort of monies owed if you go to where the money was drawn on that check. So teaching our community how to use the resources around them that will help benefit them is another thing that we need to do and support and actually get out there and do. And lastly, I will say that with the predatory, when we're talking about small business, it's completely different than consumer. I think there's this gray area a lot of people have, because it's like the transition from being a consumer and using your paycheck to then being a small business owner. In the regulatory world, small businesses are not regulated the same way as consumer credit. So anything you hear about, like the mortgage crisis or car crisis financing, that only goes on to consumer, which is your personal line of credit. Now your business line of credit has all these things like confessions of judgments that can be put on them, which means you can enter a loan with a predatory company, whether online or in person, where they don't tell you your APR. They're usually called merchant cash advances for your small business. They get you the money the same day. You think it's great, right? Because they're like, we can get it to you. You need it. It's great. It's quick. It's fast. But you don't know the APR and you don't know the frequency of payment. And then they have on top of that the confessions of judgment, which means that essentially they don't have to take you to court to have like a judge decide that there's a judgment on you. Basically, if you default on the payment, you have a COJ, you skip that process of due process and you get a judgment against you automatically. That's banned in consumer, but it's not banned for small businesses. So we need to do more advocating and regulatory within that whole small business world. I mean, there's places like On Deck, which is financial institution that provides products to help small business owners as loans. Unfortunately, they have not great practices of how they work with people in executing their loan agreements. And so many people who get loans for them as small business owners default and lose everything. I met a man who actually lost his house, his college savings for his kids, and tried to commit suicide because it was that dire of how nasty it becomes within the small business space. And so we're trying to help in advocating within that. And we need people to tell their stories so that we can get their stories out there. Let people know that this company did this to you, and so that we can get these regulations that are in dire need, because it's also taking out so many Black and brown small business owners as well. And I forgot the last portion of that question. But yeah, there's a lot of advocating that needs to be done.
Yes, there are a couple of additional questions that have come in. I did want to address quickly the issue of payday loans, predatory loans. We know they are predatory. That's why they're called predatory. We know they can be risky. And yet, to use the example that you mentioned, the fact that this gentleman was willing to take one out is a reflection of the desperate circumstances that people were already in before COVID-19.
Yes.
So again, just to make sure we are giving all due emphasis to this question, how do we ensure that the most dire of situations, of scenarios are addressed by the legislation, by the remedies that we now have an opportunity to advocate for? How do we make sure that folks who are facing the most dire, pressing circumstances that they may have already faced before COVID-19 get their needs met?
Yeah, I would say one thing is definitely finding organizations like MSA And if you want to contact me, I'm Renee, Renee, at mainstreetalliance.org. And we'll help you. We will connect you to resources in your community, connect you to your local legislature, as well as your state legislatures, to figure out what happens in your law, in your state law as well. Because there's some states who do things great and are working on what's happening for these predatory lenders, if you will, state-wise. But we're also working federally, because federal law is completely different than state law. And depending on the jurisdiction you're in, your state may have ruled that there's no predatory lending that can happen there, or merchant cash advances, but yet they're federally and they go online, and you complete your application online. So therefore the state law doesn't work there. So telling your story so we can see where these payday lenders are as well, because there's a new one popping up every day, and they all don't necessarily live in the United States. So that's why we have to work together, hear the stories people tell and share. The more sharing you do, the better we all are, because then we're able to trace and follow the system of where they are at. One example of that is we saw a ton of them lately in New York. There was a court in New York that was allowing these COJs to go on. And it wasn't until the treasurer, if you will, the financial services department there in New York got involved, that it's starting to get banned. So they're actually writing law statewide to ban those COJs and assist predatory lending persons or victims of them to getting some sort of help through other organizations that provide a conversion loan for them. So there's different ways, but just getting and talking about the issue will help start the conversation and connecting you to resources.
Thank you so much. And on the subject of stories to share, there is a question has come in. We will make this our final question before we wrap up. The question is, I have a small wedding business, but I also work as a teacher. I didn't know if I qualified for the Paycheck Protection Program, which many have heard referred to as the PPP. So I didn't submit my application to the Small Business Administration. They have sent me a message to complete the application. I just have not responded. One United, which I gather is a bank, has reached out, but I'm just fearful of trying to do anything because I do not have a separate account for my business. What do you suggest? Because I can't pay my employees right now. And what I'd like to say about this question is it is very specific to this person's situation. So, to the extent we can get to that level, great. We may need to talk at a slightly higher level to indicate what resources are available to address this question. If it's
and I can do that. And what we're telling everyone in any advocacy organization that does work in the small business space is telling everybody apply for everything you can, because there are no rules that are finite right now. The rules are changing, the law are changing. They're putting more money in. They're changing adjustments of how much money people can get. So get the money, apply for everything you can. Worry about that once you have the money, because what we're seeing is most people aren't even getting the money. So you don't even know if this is a situation to be worried about because you haven't applied and no one's giving you any resources. Secondly, what we've also told people is you could always open another account. You can just open an account, a personal account, whatever, and put money there. You can, in a lot of the larger organizations and companies that receive funding, that's what they did. They put those resources separately so that they could track every dollar, because no one knows if they're going to ask you for receipts, invoices, and everything accountable for those dollars to ensure that it turns into a grant for you. So in order to do that, we tell people in advance, just do whatever you can to make sure you track every dollar. And again, the Paycheck Protection Program is for people to pay their employees. So if you're going to pay employees, and especially if you had those employees as COVID impacted your community, then you are okay. That is not going to change because that's what it was designed to do. So I tell everyone, and I can't stress it enough, apply for everything under the sun right now. Don't say you're going to use it. Don't say that you're not going to use it. Just apply, because you don't know what's going to happen. And especially each bank is so different. There's no clear-cut process. And then also too, with the Paycheck Protection Program, they have not actually came out with guidance on how forgiveness works. So when you're signing on and saying, yes, I have this money, you have not agreed to any forgiveness. So you are also in a situation right there where it's like, no one knows what that means. I think Congress is trying to do the best of its job, right? But implementation phases from different government agencies always take longer. And we're seeing now why we need to have these systems in place prior to a pandemic to ensure people have resources before they're in dire constraints.
We're going to end there, Renee. I want to thank you. This has been so wonderful. Have loved this discussion. So many more things to talk about. So many other things occurred to me while we were talking. For example, what about large businesses, Black-owned and otherwise, right? What about other kinds of alliances or cross-sector collaboration, can we do to address these issues? So we will need to make sure that we continue this discussion one way or another.
Agreed.
But for now, thank you so much for joining us today. And for everyone who is listening, thank you for being with us. I'm happy to say that National Black Child Development Week is by no means over, still to come today. From 2 to 3 are a homeschool lunch and learn featuring Georgia Thompson. She's the president of our DC affiliate. She'll be talking about promoting children's learning through daily routines. And then coming up later is a homeschooling happy half hour, which, whether or not you have children, I encourage you to participate. These have been so enjoyable. This session will be led by hype coach KJ Rose. So we're balancing some very heavy financial discussion along with some very practical ways for families who have children at home. And I will close by saying we encourage and invite all of you to support our NBCDI Supporting Communities COVID-19 matching campaign to help provide groceries for families who need them. Please go to our website, www.nbcdi.org, to support us. Renee, thank you again. Audience, thank you again. And we will end there. Have a good afternoon.